Hey everyone, welcome to my new tutorial. Today we are going to make this cute clock animation because you know it's September, and I really hope you will enjoy this one. And if you do, please don't forget to leave that like, and if you're new to the world of 3D and Blender and you want to learn in the most effective way, be sure to check out my courses. I carefully designed them to take you from beginner skills through local illustration all the way to full character illustration and textured environment. And now they're available with English subtitles, so if you're interested, please check out the link in the description. Now let's jump right into empty Blender file, and first of all let's delete the cube and the light. So drag a selection, press X and delete, and first we'll need to create a clock, so let's press Shift A and we'll add a circle. Now we can go lower, something like 24 vertices right here. Now tab into the edit mode and press R, then X and 90 to rotate this 90 degrees. And now I want the origin point to stay in the middle, but I want the clock to be higher, so we can tab out, press G, then Z and 1 to bring it up. And now let's confirm by hitting enter. Now let's tab back into the edit mode, press F to fill and E to extrude, and let's give it the thickness like this. Okay, now let's press 7 on a numpad for a top view, press A to select all, and G then Y to center it out like this. Now we'll need to do some bevels, so let's alt click one of the loops, press Ctrl B to bevel and increase number of cuts with the mouse wheel to something like this. And now let's do one in the back, so alt click the back loop and press Ctrl B, and this one can be smaller like this. Now let's go for a face select by pressing 3 or choose it right there. Select the front face and let's inset a little bit like this, and now extrude inside. And now some bevels and loop cuts because we'll need to use subdivision modifier here, so let's press I to inset tiny bit like this. Now press Ctrl R and create a loop cut right here and one towards the outer edge just like this. And now we can tab out and press Ctrl 2 to add subdivision surface modifier, right click and shade smooth, so this will serve as a base for the clock. Now let's look from the front, and now let's hold Shift S and snap cursor to select it, and let's activate the X-ray view so we see through. And now let's press Shift A and we'll add a plane. Now tab into the edit mode and we'll just press M and merge at center, so this will collapse the whole plane into one single vertex that we can then extrude. So make sure you are in the vertex select by pressing 1, select that new vertex, press E then Z and extrude it down like this, maybe even more. And now we'll tab out and rotate in the object mode, so press R and rotate it like this. Now tab back into the edit mode and we'll move this out so it touches the ground there. So let's select the vertex and press G then Z twice, because remember this is the local Z axis of this object, so move it right here. And now we can select this one, press G twice and just slide it along so it doesn't go inside like this. And additionally we can tab out, right click and convert to curve. And now in the curve settings we can go to the geometry section and increase the depth. Now tab into the edit mode, we'll right click and choose subdivide. They'll create one more control point, so we can select the endpoint and press Alt S to reduce the radius like this. And now we'll reduce the resolution to 2 and just leave it like this. And now we can press Shift D and R immediately after that and rotate it up like this. Tab into the edit mode and we'll get rid of the control point right there, so press X and delete. Now select this one, press G then Z twice again to move along local axis and move it up like this. And now let's hold Shift S and snap cursor to select it, and we'll create the ringer right there. So tab out and let's press Shift A and we'll add a circle. Now tab into the edit mode, let's make it smaller. Press E then Z to extrude along the Z axis and F to fill. Let's look at that, and now press Ctrl B to bevel and create a shape like this. That should be enough. So now we can look from the front again by pressing 1 on a numpad, press A to select all and press G then Z and move it down so the origin point is somewhere here in the middle. And now we can tab out and rotate like this. And now additionally we can press Ctrl 2 to add subdivision surface modifier, right click, shade smooth, and let's go to the modifiers panel and let's add solidify modifier, and let's give this negative thickness like this, so we have some volume there. And additionally, right click and shade auto smooth with something like 45 degrees, so we get sharp edges at the bottom. You can see the difference right here. If I toggle X-ray and choose smooth, you will see this is all mushy and rounded, and now with the auto smooth we have this hard edge because of this angle. So that's the ringer, and now we'll select this and duplicate one more time. So Shift D, right click to release, and let's press Alt R to reset the rotation, and press R and 180 degrees and confirm, so it's up top. But we'll need to move the origin point, so press G then Z and move it up somewhere here. And now tab into the edit mode and press G then Z and move the data down like this. Okay, and additionally in the curve settings we can reduce the depth like this. Now press Shift D and Z to duplicate this, and press R and 90 to rotate 90 degrees. And with these two control points selected, we can press Alt S and increase the radius just like that, so we'll get this little hammer. Now we can tab out, and this will be basically prepared for animation to move like this. Now let's finish with the rest of the clock. So first of all, let's select these parts, and now I'll right click and convert back to mesh. Now I'll tab in, alt click the outside loop, press F to fill, and press Ctrl R to create support loops right here towards the edges. And now if we tab out, press Ctrl 1 and right click and shade smooth, we have this nice smooth object. Now let's do the same up here. Here we can basically just press Ctrl 1 and right click and shade smooth, and here we'll convert this to mesh as well. So right click, convert to mesh, tab into the edit mode, and we'll alt click the loops and press F to fill. Now press 3 for face select. Now let's hold shift, select the other one, and press Ctrl B and bevel like this. Now we can tab out, press Ctrl 2 to add subdivision surface, right click and shade smooth. And now some mirroring, so let's select the bottom leg, go to the modifiers tab, and let's add a mirror modifier, and we'll use the eyedropper tool to choose the clock as the center of the mirroring. And now let's select these two objects up top, so select the first one, hold shift, select the other one, and now hold shift, select the leg, and with the mirror modifier choose copy to select it. Okay, this should be enough. And now let's select this part, hold shift, select this, press Ctrl P, and set parent to object. So now we are able to go to the front view by pressing 1 on the numpad and just rotate this to find a better location, and additionally scale this up or down, or maybe make this a little bit higher along the z-axis with no issues at all. And now let's finish the clock in the front. So tab into the edit mode, and first of all let's go for face select. Select this face, press Shift D to duplicate, right click to release, and then P, and separate the selection. That will separate it into a new object right here. So we can tab out, select that new object, and we get this ugly overlap, but don't worry about this. Let's tab in, press A to select all, and G then Y, hold shift and slightly move it towards the front, so we get rid of that overlap. And now we can press I to inset, just like this. And now let's go for edge select by pressing 2, hold Alt and Control and select this edge. That will select these perpendicular edges all along the loop. And now we can press Ctrl B to bevel and create the bevel just like this. And now reduce the number of cuts with the mouse wheel, so we get only one bevel segment. And now let's go for face select, press Ctrl I and press X and delete faces. That will get rid of everything else here. Let's look from the front, and we don't need the subdivision modifier. That one got transferred from the original object, so let's delete that. And now we'll get rid of the extra faces we don't need, so basically every other right here. Should be fairly quick to select by holding shift, press X and delete faces. And now press A to select all and E to extrude. And now additionally we can look from the front, enable X-ray view, and press W to change this to a circular selection, and just drag a selection around like this, so we get the bottom parts. And now we can press Alt S to scale this inside a little bit like that. Now tab out and we'll go and add bevel modifier right here. Let's disable the X-ray view and let's reduce the amount to something like this. Increase the segments and we can right click shade auto smooth with 180 degrees, and now in the shading we'll enable harden normals. So this will get us nice hard surface object. Now let's select the clock again, tab into the edit mode and let's press W a few times until we have the rectangle selection again. Select the front face and we'll press Shift D, right click to release and P enter to separate. Again, tab out, select that new object, press A to select all and scale it down like this and move it towards the front like that, and E to extrude. And now we can press Ctrl B to bevel with few segments, and in the back let's choose edge select and bevel this loop tiny bit like this. And now we can hold Shift S and snap cursor to select it. Let's press Shift A and we'll add a plane. Tab into the edit mode, let's look from the front. Now again we'll switch to X-ray, press R then X and 90 to rotate 90 degrees and press S to scale it down. And now we'll select this edge, press G then Z and move it up just like this. Press A and E to extrude, and now we'll just move it towards the front. So tab out and with the origin point in the object mode we'll move it right here. Now we'll need the same bevel modifier like here, so let's hold Shift, select these and just transfer the modifier. Now select the hand, right click and shade auto smooth, and now we'll press Shift D, R and 90 to rotate this 90 degrees, and let's just tab into the edit mode and with the X-ray select the side, press G then X and make it shorter. And now we can disable the X-ray, and in terms of decorations let's make one more thing here. Select the clock, tab into the edit mode, and let's now select this loop right here, so alt click there, press Shift D, right click to release and P enter again to separate the selection. We can tab out, select the new edge, and first of all let's remove the subdivision, right click and convert to curve, and in the curve settings again we can increase the depth, and now we can press Ctrl 2 to add the subdivision back, but on the curve this time. Now let's select the clock again and we'll create the glass in the front. So let's tab into the edit mode and we'll do the same thing. Let's enable X-ray and again we'll select the same loop, press Shift D and P to separate, and again we'll tab out, select that new object, tab into the edit mode, F to fill and I to inset like this, and press G then Y and move it towards the front, and now press Ctrl B to bevel, and depending on how detailed you want this to be, add some segments like this. And now we can press A to select all. Let's look from the side and we'll push it inside a little bit, so press G then Y and move it like here. Now we can tab out, and while still in the X-ray view, first of all let's right click and shade auto smooth, but now let's go back to the original like 40 degrees, and now in the modifiers panel we'll add solidify, and let's go inside like this, so we have like a thick glass in the front. And now we can just select everything, hold Shift, select the clock as a main object, and now hold Control and deselect these because these were part of this object right here. And now press Ctrl P and parent and keep transformation. So now if you select the clock, the whole object moves, and we are basically ready for animation. So let's disable the X-ray view and let's expand the timeline a little bit, and now let's modify the timeline to something like 80 frames, should be enough. And now in the output settings let's modify the frame rate to 30, and let's create the first keyframes. So let's move to like frame 10, and here the anticipation part of the animation will start. So let's press N to bring up the side panel, and let's right click the Z scale and insert single keyframe. And now let's move to like frame 15, and we'll press S then Z and scale it down a little bit like this, right click and insert single keyframe. And here on the frame 20 the jump will occur, so we'll increase this and basically drag it up like this, and right click and insert single keyframe. So the clock will do something like this. And now as we go to frame 15, let's look from the front, you will see this is hanging in the air a little bit. So on the frame 10, let's insert Z location as well. And on the frame 15, it will go down. So right click and insert single keyframe. And then as it starts, the jump will occur and it will continue to like frame 25. So let's press G then Z and move it up like this. Right click and insert single keyframe. So we have something like this happening there. So this is the part where we block out the animation, the keyframes and the timing, and later we'll figure out the curves of the animation and the snappiness, the effects and the easing part. So let's look at this. And now around the frame 45 it will start to come down. So let's right click and insert single keyframe here. But I want to do several things with the scale here as well, because as it goes up, the scale will collapse to its original state. So let's around frame 30 insert scale of 1 and right click insert single keyframe. So it will collapse back and then it will start to stretch out around here. So let's select this frame, press Shift D and duplicate it there, and around the frame 45 it will already be larger on the Z-axis. So let's expand this, right click and insert single keyframe, and it will go down towards like frame 55. So here the scale will be lower like this. There will be a bounce effect. Right click insert single keyframe and it will be touching the ground. So press G then Z and move it down. Right click insert single keyframe and then it will kind of spring back up. So here we can reset the scale, but at the same time need to move this up and insert single keyframe. Okay, and now the timings. I think as it protrudes here, it should already be going down. So maybe something like this. Okay, so let's now take care of the animation curves. So let's expand the timeline and press Ctrl and Tab to switch to the graph editor. And now here we have both tracks, the Z scale and Z location. So we can press A to select all and period on a numpad to expand this. And now we can see the collapse is happening and the jump should be more snappy. But here I want this to hang a little bit in the air. But at the same time, I didn't want it to just stop the movement. So we'll add a new keyframe right here. So let's select this one, for example, press Shift D and then X to hold it and move towards the frame 34, let's say. And now here I want to select it, press G then Z and move it up slightly like this. So it will kind of more just hover before it comes crashing down. It can be even more a little bit. Something like this. Okay, and I think the animation should be like more steep. So let's select this endpoint and let's bring it up like this. And here as well. Okay, and I think this might be a little more snappy. And here we'll change this to bounce. So select the frame, press T and choose bounce. And same for the scale, so T and bounce. So right here, something like this should happen. Now, as I play back the animation, you can see it looks a little bit weird because the clock is going down, but the collapse is happening kind of out of pace. So we'll need to slow it down a little bit, and we can just move this and make this curve a little bit more fluent. Like this, and then kind of compress all of this down. So let's make this a little bit steeper. Okay, I think this is looking much better. Maybe even more. We can compress it down even more. Let's bring it closer together like this. And here as well. and let's make the fall a little bit more sudden. Okay, looks fine. And now if you want this to go higher, you can always just select these keyframes, press G then Z and move them up, and it will jump a little bit higher. Now let's add a little bit of rotation into the mix. So around the frame 15, as it goes up, let's create a new keyframe for the X rotation and Z rotation. So right click and insert single keyframe, and same here. And now around here, it should be kind of tilted. So let's rotate around the Z a little bit like this, and around the X just like that. Right click and insert single keyframe, same here. Now we can hide the Z scale and Z location, and now press A and period on a keyboard, and that will focus our animation on our rotation tracks. And now we can just duplicate this around the frame where it will come down, so maybe even sooner a little bit, and now duplicate these right here. Okay, and maybe this might be a little bit more steep. Nice. So that's for the rotations, and now there's one important movement, and that's kind of that wiggle movement when the alarm clock goes off. So let's go back to frame 15, and right here we'll create a new Y rotation keyframe, insert single keyframe, and we can hide the X and Z rotation. And let's select the Y rotation track right here on the left. And now here, if you don't see this, press N for the side panel, and in the modifiers panel we'll add a noise modifier and restrict the frame range from 15 to those like 55 or something. I think it should stop at 45, so 45. And then we can use 15 frames for blending. Okay, and we can increase the strength a little bit if we want. Okay, and one more thing, we'll add a similar movement to this hammer. So let's go to frame 15 and let's insert the single keyframe for the Y rotation. And here, same as before, let's select the track and we'll add the noise modifier with the similar settings. So 15 for the 5, 15 and 15, or we don't need to blend in here probably. And now we'll only need to set the range. You can see this is a little bit too low, so let's increase the strength so it actually touches on the sides there. Okay. Nice. Okay, so that's for the clock alarm animation. Right now we'll need to take care of some materials and lighting, so let's hit Ctrl Tab here in the timeline to switch back. Let's collapse this. And now let's hold Shift S, snap cursor to world origin, let's press Shift A and we'll create a plane. Now tab into the edit mode and let's scale it up like this and tab out. And now let's look from the camera, and we can select the camera and move it up a little bit and rotate around the cursor. So hold period, switch to 3D cursor and press R then Z and rotate it a little bit like this. Now we can bring it up even more, and let's change the resolution in the output settings to 1600 to 1200 and bring it closer by pressing G then Z twice. Okay, and I think we'll need to go lower, like this. Okay, and now in the render settings, let's switch to cycles, enable GPU and denoising, and I will go for 64 samples for the animation and press Ctrl B to limit the render only to camera bounce. And let's preview our render. Now this is obviously too dark, so let's press Shift A and we'll add a light. Let's add area light, press G then Z and move it up. Let's make it a little bit larger. And in the light settings, let's switch to disk and let's set something like 1500. And let's make it even larger so we get nice and soft light from the top. And we'll need to play around with this. Maybe this is too strong, something like 1000 should be enough. And now let's take care of the glass because I don't like that I don't see through this. So go to material settings, create a new material. Let's call this glass. And here we'll increase the transmission and decrease the roughness to something like 0.02. And the one more thing that's important in the base color, make sure you go all the way up toward the white. So now you can see, we can see nicely through. Now for the colors, I want to go something funky. You can get really creative here. So let's select the clock, let's create a new material, and I want to go something like a violet blue color here with really low roughness, something like 0.1. And now here for the outer frame, I want the white color, but again, really low roughness. And let's select the clock again, tab into the edit mode, and let's enable X-ray. And I want to select this face in the front, press Ctrl plus on a numpad to expand the selection. And now in the material settings, let's create a new material slot. And let's choose that white material and let's hit assign. So we have it there as well. Now we can select some other objects and reuse the material we just created. So here as well, for example. And now let's introduce a new one. So this will be orange material, and again with low roughness. And let's use the same for the hands. And here as well. Now, I don't like that this is just peeking out of here, so we can select the clock. Let's go to the solid view for a second, disable X-ray view. We can tab in and select these two faces, press Shift D and P to separate, and basically create an object that will kind of hide the fact that this hammer is basically just peeking out of the clock. So let's press Alt E and extrude along normals, and we can add some support loops and basically delete the bottom face, so X and delete faces, and move this down like this. And now just duplicate it with Shift D. So something like this will help us hide the hammer. So now let's go back to the rendered preview. The animation still works. And now for these, let's give this orange as well. And for the background, let's go something warm and orangey as well. So now let's look from the camera. And this is the basic lighting. And now, since I'm using the glossy materials, I want much more reflections. So you could either use HDRI, but I like to keep this stylized and under control. So what I like to do is basically just to duplicate a bunch of lights around, but you need to be careful not to overlight the scene. So I bring down the value of the light and just look for the reflections I'm going for. So let me show you an example. I can just select this area light, press Shift D and bring it down by pressing Z. And now let's make it smaller. And let's enter something like 250 and press G, then Shift Z, and just move it around like this until it creates new reflections. And of course it lights the objects a little bit from the side. As you can see, the difference is there, and you get more light from the side here, but you also get new reflections. So you can just move this around, for example in the back here, and create interesting reflections. And for example, we can create a nice backlight as well. So here we can go something stronger and color the light as well. And finally, in the world settings, you can use some world color that will help you blend this together a little bit better. And let's increase the roughness on the background a little bit. Okay, and now let's create some more lights. You can get really creative with this. For example, you can just duplicate this up here. And for example, reduce the power to something like only 25, so it doesn't affect the scene so much. And press Alt D to duplicate a bunch of those, like this, and then parent them so they can be moved at once. And now you get these 4 lights reflection on your object. So this really helps to sell that fake HDRI effect. Something like studio lighting or something. And then you can go really low, like 10, if you really don't want this to affect your scene, but the small reflection remains. And now, as you can see, this is quite overlighted due to this light right here. So let's reduce the size and the strength as well. We'll make this a little bit darker. Okay. And here I want to create one more really strong light in the back. So something like 5K, really large, to light up the background. Let's use the white color. Okay, and now the render settings, we can use different contrast settings and play with the exposure. Okay, and with the background we can go maybe a little bit darker. And I think this looks quite nice. Maybe we can go back with the exposure a little bit. Okay, and one important thing before you render out, don't forget to enable motion blur. And with the camera you can add some depth of field as well. Let's focus, for example, on the glass. And let's reduce the f-stop to something like 1.2. And then just in the output settings, you set your folder, switch to FFmpeg, and I use MP4 encoding, and just go and render animation, wait out your results, and you will get your animation. So that's it for today's, stylized icon animation. I really hope you enjoyed this one, and if you did, please don't forget to leave that like, and if you're new around here, hit that subscribe. Thank you all for watching and have a wonderful day.